So, good morning, everyone. And I'm Meesha Tandon. I'm the host for the webinar and a presenter as well. This is the second of this water series webinar, and we have seen a great response. More than 270 participants wanted to join, and they are spread across around 35 countries across the globe. So thanks so much for all those who've expressed interest. And this also goes on to show how important the subject water is and that the water issues are predominant globally. So I think let's get started. I'll switch off my webcam and share my screen and start the presentation.
Hello everyone, welcome to the second webinar in the Water Web series. Today's topic is Integrated Water Resource Management, or IWRM. This webinar will be conducted in two parts, this month and next month. I am Meesha Tandon. I'm an architect environmental planner with expertise in watershed management. I have around 15 years of experience in urban development, like city development plans, smart city proposals. I have also worked on projects related to water resource management for international funding agencies. I have also worked on interventions related to climate change, and now through my organizations, I am initiating interventions related to sustainable development and climate adaptation. So today's webinar will be in three sessions. The first session will be on catchment-based approach to planning, which will be by me, Meesha Tandon. The second session will be on the power of collaboration, stakeholder engagement in IWRM. This will be by Miss Annalieke Laninga. She's a water governance consultant and facilitator of multi-stakeholder processes. And then we'll have a Q&A session where we'll take in your questions. So I'll request you to keep typing in, and we'll possibly also unmute the participants so you can ask your questions as well. I'll take a minute to introduce the organization. We work towards sustainable development and climate change, especially in the adaptation sector. Our vision is to mainstream sustainable development for climate preparedness of every citizen. We are conducting this program called Mission 2030 with the aim of building more climate leaders in India, especially amongst the youth, more leaders like Greta. So with that idea, we have conducted several training programs across various states with school and college students, and around 400 students have been reached out till date, and we intend to take it much further beyond this, and you guys are most welcome to join. Okay, so today we'll try and answer some very basic questions like where does water in your tap come from? Where do rivers get their water from? Because these questions will help us understand catchment behavior. We'll look at IWRM, or Integrated Water Resource Management, in its historic context and its present day applications. We'll also look at the European Water Framework Directive, which is a landmark directive in terms of promoting catchment-based planning through stakeholder involvement. We'll also look at some case studies. And since a lot of you asked me after the last webinar, how can we associate and join your initiatives? So I'll share the initiatives of the organization with you, and you can join the ones that interest you. Okay, so let's start with this. This is a Google Earth image of Gangotri Glacier, which is the source of Ganga River in India, one of the largest rivers in the world. And this is an image from 1984, and I'll change the slide and show you an image from 2016. And I want you to notice the differences. Okay, I hope you can notice the differences. I'm not going to make any statements here because there's a lot of debate going on regarding whether the glaciers are melting or not, and whether the extent of melt is a cause of concern or not. But I think the trends are clear, and this makes us think about how the water security can be impacted in the future, given that Ganga is one of the largest rivers in the world, and it is a source of water as well as livelihood for a huge chunk of Indian population. Okay, so this is another Google Earth image from 1984 from the Ganga catchment, and I want you to notice the general greenery and the pattern of tributaries and distributaries, especially in this area. And when I change the image, notice how the pattern has changed. So can you see the difference now? Can you see how the the tributaries and the sub-tributaries, especially in this area, have disappeared? Now, how does this make a difference? Why should we be bothered? I mean, the main river channels are definitely there. How does it make a difference? Well, okay, let's try and look at it this way. If you have a rain event, okay, if you have a lot of ponds and tributaries and distributaries in your catchment and a lot of green areas, they're going to store a lot of that runoff that falls on the ground, and they will limit the amount of runoff that reaches your mainstream immediately. Now, once these so-called buffers are gone, the entire runoff is going to immediately enter your mainstream, and it's going to cause flooding. It's going to cause flash floods, and it's going to cause inundation and losses. But what you also need to understand is that it will also lead to a significant amount of erosion of the riverbed. Now, once your riverbed gets eroded, the channel becomes deeper, and studies internationally have shown that if such a thing happens and the riverbed is deepened and there's a lot of erosion that happens, that leads to more floods in the future. So not only will this impact you once, but it will also lead to problems in the longer term. What this also leads to is that, if your your storage buffers from the catchment are gone, your recharge potential reduces significantly. And recharge potential is also very important to the river flow. I'll tell you how in the slides that we take up later on during this session. Now, as I said, let's try and understand and answer some very basic questions like where does water in your tap come from? Where do rivers get their water from? Because these questions will help us understand catchment behavior. So if I were to ask you where does water in your tap come from, some of you will say it comes from the pipeline. And where does the water in the pipeline come from? Some of you will say it comes from the treatment plant. But where does water in the treatment plant come from? There could be a surface water source like a river or a pond or even sea water after desalination, or there could be a groundwater source. But we need to understand, how do these sources still have water several months after rains? This is a very important question, especially in a water scarce country like ours. So I'll quickly go over this diagram of hydrological processes operating in a catchment. Basically, when you get precipitation in the form of rain or snow, if you have a tree cover in the form of, say, a forest area, then the rainfall is intercepted by the tree canopy, which reduces the amount of rainfall that immediately reaches the ground. And this is very, very useful, especially in a country like ours where the rainfall intensity is very high, because then the rain gradually reaches the soil and the soil is able to take in more water as compared to a similar piece of land without a tree cover where the rainfall will fall directly. So once this infiltration through the soil happens, water percolates inside and reaches the water table if it's able to reach the saturated zone, or it forms a part of the unconfined aquifer, which is closer to the ground. Now, when continues to rain and there's no infiltration happening any further, then you get what is called as runoff generation, which means that water starts flowing over the surface, and it leads to runoff generation, which goes and meets a stream or a lake or the ocean, or even forms a depression storage. And there is also movement within the soil that happens in the form of interflow, and this interflow can possibly reach a lake or an ocean nearby. Okay, so let's try and understand what is a catchment. A catchment area has been defined as the area of land that flows into a river, lake, or reservoir. Now, if you were to imagine this piece of land, this piece of paper as a piece of land, with ridges and valleys, I would like you to try and identify some catchments here. Can you see a flow pattern happening on this piece of crumpled paper? Can you see some catchments here? Can you see this catchment? This is a catchment, and the water will flow in this direction towards the base of the catchment. It's more like a valley being formed here, and this is the direction of water flow that we are getting here, and probably it will go on like this. Similarly, you have another one being formed here. The water will flow towards the base of the catchment and then flow out through this valley here. Another one formed here, and so on. But I hope this helps you understand the general pattern of how catchments are formed and how the water flows. What is also important to understand is these catchment divides. These are the lines, these are the watershed divides that divide one catchment from the other. They are essentially areas of elevation, like, for example, a ridge. This is the highest point, and the water from either side will flow in opposite directions. So these are the lines that define the boundary of catchments. Okay, so let's talk about a very important component of catchment hydrology, which is base flow. Base flow is the sustained flow in the water bodies that you get even after several days or weeks or months of rainfall event. Now, what causes this base flow? How does this base flow come into the rivers? Basically, what happens is that when it rains, some of the rainfall is able to infiltrate inside, the soil cover, and it reaches the bedrock. Now, depending upon the kind of soil moisture that is there, a lot of this rainfall is likely to get absorbed in the soil, as well as it can also get absorbed by the weathered bedrock itself. There is also a possibility that there are cracks or crevices or fractures within the bedrock through which this water can enter and keep on flowing. Now, this water can then resurface as a spring, and this resurfacing can happen either immediately after a rainfall event or even months after a rainfall event. That will depend upon the local conditions that are there. Now, this is an example that I'm showing you for a valley slope, but then this is a very common phenomenon even in the plains, even with slight topographical alterations. And forests have been known to retain a lot of moisture and lead to better base flows as compared to other land uses. And these base flows are very, very important for a country like India, where we get almost 75% of our rainfall within a few months. So these base flows can help sustain our rivers for longer, even after monsoons. So when you're planning a catchment, you need to understand that there are a lot of layers at work. There would be land use, land cover, including urban settlements. There would be hydrology, geology, topography, soil cover, soil type, um, forest cover, and many more layers that are at play, and they interact with each other and impact each other. And that is what you need to understand while you're planning a catchment. What you also need to understand is that there are going to be a lot of stakeholders and a lot of users and uses in the catchment. There would be residential users, commercial users, religious, floodplains, forests, transportation, and many others. And not all stakeholders will be humans. There would be ecological interactions. There would be biodiversity, including flora, fauna, avifauna, aquatic and riparian species that you need to consider for, because they are an equal user of the catchment as you are. So now let's look at integrated water resource management. Is this a new concept, especially in the Indian subcontinent? So if you look to the left, you can see images from Dholavira. This is in Gujarat. This is a part of the Indus Valley civilization. It has been termed as having one of the most sophisticated water conservation systems of channels and reservoirs, one of the earliest in the world. So the settlement had 3 large reservoirs, and there were a lot of them that were excavated underground. And these reservoirs were used to store the rainwater directly, and also to divert the water that was flowing in the rivulets close to the city, to the settlement. To the right, you can see images of the Great Bath from Mohenjo-daro. That settlement had 700 wells at that time, which is the highest number in the world at that time. It had drainage system, sewerage system, water supply, and the earliest public bath in the ancient world. So we definitely had an understanding of this approach. However, we need to re-look at it and re-understand it. Even until pretty recently, you have such examples which can be seen, which show that India has traditionally had this knowledge. Here I'm sharing a case from Rajasthan, where there was a series of interlinked ponds. Even in that desert area, there was an understanding of how the catchment is behaving, how the water will flow, and how it can be channelized and stored. So, for example, I'll just show here. You can see there's some bunding which has been done to tap the water here. And this is Gadisar Lake, which is the largest lake in Jaisalmer. It's a man-made lake. And from here, you had water flowing into Govindsar, the overflow. And then from Govindsar, there was a provision for the water to go into Gulab Sagar. And there are more such interlinked ponds in Jaisalmer. I'm only talking about 3, but there are more. And not just in Jaisalmer, you have so many cities of India which have had these interlinked ponds. You can find them in Madhya Pradesh, you can find them in Karnataka. These are spread all over the country. And this is the kind of wisdom we have had. We have had this understanding that we need to tap the water and we need to utilize the excess. We've also had traditional Gram Panchayats, and water has been one of the topics on which discussions and debates have taken place in panchayats, and it has been collective decision making. Let's try and understand what IWRM means in the present day context. Today, the concept of IWRM, Integrated Water Resources Management, is based on Dublin principles. Now, these are a set of principles which advocate that fresh water is finite and vulnerable, and it is essential to sustain life, development, and environment. All 3 are important: life, development, environment. Water management and development should be participatory, and it should involve the users. So that is where it advocates the participatory approach. Women play a central role, and water has economic value. All competing uses should be considered as economic goods. So these are the basic principles. I've just written a gist of these principles, but yeah, these are the governing principles of the concept of IWRM. Okay, so now let's look at the 7 principles of IWRM. The first one is that you should try and manage water resources at the lowest possible level. For example, we have the central government, we have the state government. In India, state government has the power to manage water resources within their boundaries, because water is a state subject in India. Under the 73rd and the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, more powers have been decentralized to the urban local bodies or the municipalities and the rural local bodies or the panchayats. So, this also includes how they manage water locally. The question is now, do we also need to look at another tier wherein the community and the citizens play an active role in managing the water resources? Okay, so the next principle of IWRM focuses on optimizing supply and managing demand. Now, till now, our approach has been towards supply management, wherein we have tried to dam as many rivers as we can, make as many reservoirs as possible. But as we can all see all around us, this is leading to increasing water conflicts all across the world. Now, what we need to be mindful of is that this is no longer a sustainable solution. We have had cities in Rajasthan getting water supply from the Ganga basin without realizing the value of that water. Rajasthan itself has had this traditional wealth of rainwater harvesting structures like tankas, bawdis, and wells, which have lived them through centuries of droughts. But with the advent of water supply, the relevance of these structures is being lost, and that is what people need to realize, that you need such systems and structures, localized rainwater harvesting structures, to complement the supply that you're already getting. What we also need to be mindful of is that Indian cities have almost 50% leakage losses. Now, one person had once said that water saved is equal to a water body created. So you can imagine how many water bodies we're losing out on every day. We also need to understand that though we have prescribed standards like 135 LPCD, 70 LPCD for supply to cities, we need to understand that we need to be more efficient. We need to start looking at demand management, because it might not be a privilege for all cities to keep on having this kind of water supply for a very, very long time if we continue with our existing trends. We need to start focusing on demand management, and we need to start determining how we can best use the water that we have. So another principle is that you need to provide equitable access to water resources through participatory and transparent governance and management. Now, basically, essentially, you need to firstly look at equitability of access, which means that the poorest of the poor and the richest of the rich should have equal right to access water. I would even add that, even animals and birds and, other ecological users and users should also be considered. For example, in this image to the left, you can see how people in Indian cities have traditionally been building these small tankas for cows and other animals to drink water from. Establishing improved and integrated policy, regulatory, and institutional frameworks. So basically, this calls for integration, the systems approach that we've been talking about. That is very, very important. You have a lot of silos happening, and they need to start working together. You need to regulate better, and you need more improved institutional frameworks for this to work. Now, the next principle is that there is a need to use the intersectoral approach to decision making. Now, what happens that in our cities we have different departments who work in silos, and they don't really interact with each other too. So firstly, this calls for all the departments to work together in joint and participatory manner for better decision making. And on the other hand, you need to also consider the fact that once you're planning for water, it's not natural for us to think that, okay, maybe a planner should also be involved in it. Okay, maybe a biodiversity expert should also be involved. Maybe a forest department person should also be involved. So that is what this intersectoral approach looks at. You need to look at all the sectors that are directly or indirectly, say even transport, how they are impacting or being impacted by the decisions that we're making, and how we can work together. The last principle is that integrating management means that we receive multiple benefits from a single intervention. For example, if you undertake an activity for plantation, that is not only protecting your floodplain, that is not only purifying the runoff that is entering into your river, it also helps reduce the flooding, it also helps mitigate climate change impact. It also captures carbon. It also provides hub for biodiversity. So, there are multiple benefits that you need to look at. Unfortunately, what happens is that whatever proposals most governments think of, they only think of hard infrastructural approaches. We'll probably just build a dam here, we'll build a wall there. These kind of approaches are much more common, but we need to realize that the gray infrastructure approaches might not be the only solution. You can probably have a better solution with green infrastructure as well. Okay, so now we'll look at the European Water Framework Directive, which advocates a participatory approach towards catchment-based planning. Okay, so basically the Water Framework Directive has the overall purpose to establish a framework for protection of inland surface waters, transitional waters, coastal waters, and groundwaters. Basically, the entire idea is like, for example, in India, we have the Environmental Protection Act, which acts as an umbrella legislation for all environmental parameters. Similarly, it was thought that instead of having separate legislations for various aspects related to water quality and other parameters, it's better to have a holistic approach, a combined approach towards water resource management in an integrated form. So that is why this directive came up in 2000, and it's been almost 20 years, and the member states are still evolving. They are learning with the preparation of river basin management plans and the cycles. So it's evolving in that sense. The best part about this is that it promotes the catchment as a unit for planning through a participatory approach. It advocates a single system of water management, which is governed by these river basin management plans, which are prepared every 6 years. The idea is to get a good status for all waters with focus on water quality, protection of ecology and habitats, and protection of drinking water sources. So basically, Water Framework Directive advocates a combined approach. So you're not simply looking at sources of pollution, you're not simply monitoring water sources for their quality, you're using a combined approach for a holistic improvement in the ecological status of the catchment of the water body. So it calls for this holistic approach whereby each catchment is given each water body in the catchment is given ecological status based on the existing level of pollution and pressures on that water body, and then we decide a desired state. And stakeholder platforms and consultations are propagated under this directive, which help you improve the water body's condition and use the basin as a unit for planning. And this is a very important concept for the Indian context, because we are having increasing water conflicts, and which are probably going to increase further with the impacts of climate change. So we need to be mindful of how we promote we need to promote these consultative processes in our cities and catchment areas as well. So as I said, this Water Framework Directive calls for formulation of river basin management plans. The plans have to meet the objectives of ecological status, quantitative status, chemical status, and protected area objectives. Now, these are strict time-bound actions wherein you yourself have to set targets. So it provides that flexibility to each member state, and it is prepared with the involvement of all relevant stakeholders through public participation process. Now, one of the directive's most important innovation has been called the introduction of water pricing into the directive. And these, as I said, these basin management plans are developed over a 6-year cycle. So the first cycle has ended in 2015. The next one is in 2021 and 2027. I would not say that this has been very successful, but yes, it has started. It's a step in the right direction, and all the member states are over time learning to improve upon their understanding of the catchments and of the basins and water bodies in which they work. One of the biggest features of the directive is the systems-based approach that it promotes, and that is also one of the loopholes right now, because a lot of member states are struggling to understand this systems approach. So there are interactions and interdependencies of ecosystems, settlements, etc., and these need to be understood better. There is also a need for understanding of the basic principles of the directive. So that is how you are going to be able to holistically plan for a catchment. Okay, so let's look at some of the case studies. So the first case study is from Shimla, Himachal Pradesh. This is basically a study that I'd done in 2007 using 13 years of rainfall runoff data for Shimla area. These are the 4 catchments that I had looked at. And what you see on your right is how these catchments overlap with the the proposed land use plan for Shimla. This was the then proposed land use plan. Obviously, the proposed land use is going to be different now, but yeah, this shows how the two are linked. Okay, so let's see how a Himalayan catchment responds to rainfall events. What you see on your right side is the graphical representation. The upper one is the response of a forested catchment, and the lower one is the response of an urban catchment. Blue lines show the rainfall events, and red lines show the runoff generation. Now, if we look at a blow up, what you can see in these green boxes shows the response of a forested catchment, and you can see that much lesser runoff is generated. You can see less of those red lines being generated as compared to the urban catchment below, where you can see within these yellow boxes that a lot of runoff or red lines are being generated. Similarly, if we look at base flow, the forested catchment in this green box shows a lot of base flow generation, whereas in the urban catchment in this yellow box below, you can see that there's hardly any base flow. And base flow is very important for countries like India, where most of the rainfall happens within 3 or 4 months, and you have a lot of rivers running dry during the summers. So another aspect that I looked at was how is a catchment impacted if the same amount of urbanization happens to different catchments. So I took up 4 catchments, and the same amount of urbanization was modeled on all these 4 catchments, and the response of the catchment in terms of the impact on water runoff generation varied across these catchments. And the parameters that determined how this response would vary were topography, which means whether you have a steep slope catchment or you have a gentle slope catchment, whether you have high forest cover or low forest cover, what kind of land use do you have in the catchment, and also a combination of these above factors. So if you want to understand how your city or your catchment is going to behave, and how is it going to respond to more urbanization in future, then you should consider its impact on these factors. And as I've said, forests are very, very crucial at retaining base flow, and base flow is very important for countries like ours because it helps recharge. It also reduces flooding downstream, and it is also going to be very, very important because such events are going to increase in the future with climate change. Okay, so as I discussed before, one of the important findings of the study was that, soil moisture deficits run so deep in the soil that they can even reach the weathered bedrock. And when your rainfall falls, especially in mountainous regions, it can reach the weathered bedrock and can keep on flowing gradually along the surface of the weathered bedrock. The fractures, the crevices in the terrain, and then it can gradually reappear and resurface after several months or days or even hours after the rainfall event. And this is very, very important because we found that these springs have an important role in the base flow that mountain rivers especially have during the lean period or the summer period. So that is why it is important that we recognize the importance of these springs and conserve their catchments. Now, the catchment of a spring can be located in, say 100 kilometers from where the spring actually emerges. But it is very important to retain a buffer wherever you can around the stream, around the catchment, so that these natural processes are conserved. This time delay is very, very crucial because it helps water being available during the lean period, and it helps build resilience to climate events. Now, this is another case study from Burhanpur, Madhya Pradesh. This is close to Indore, Khandwa region of Madhya Pradesh. Now, what you can see here is the Satpura ranges. This is all the Satpura ranges. And this here is the Tapti River. And what you can see here is Burhanpur city. So essentially, the city is located along the foothills of Satpura and along the banks of Tapti. So the runoff from the Satpuras flows in this direction towards Tapti, and this city of Burhanpur has a very, very unique feature. It's called the Kundi Bhandara. It is an underground water tunnel which runs from the foothills of the mountains to the river, and this is a man-made structure. So it's a 17th century canal system which was built during the reign of Akbar. It was designed by Khan Khanan. The idea was that Akbar did not want his army to get poisoned by the enemy, who was capable of poisoning Tapti. So he wanted to have a backup water resource system, and that is why this was built as an underground tunnel system. So you can see these are the walls of that underground tunnel, and one can actually walk through this entire tunnel. And this white thing that you see is actually the calcium deposits that have formed on the walls of that tunnel over the centuries. So basically, as you can see here in this diagram, the runoff from the Satpura gradually flows through the entire slope and meets Tapti River. And these are kundis or wells that have been made into the tunnel along the slope to access water from this tunnel. So it used to initially have a discharge of at least 1 mld, but now it has gone down to around 0.4 mld over the years. As I said, because you have a lot of degradation of Satpura forests happening. You have climate change impacts. You have a lot of calcium, magnesium deposits happening along the walls of the Bhandara itself, and there are anthropogenic interferences. And also, the structure is at least 300 odd years old. So, and the structure was even used to supply water to the city until pretty recently. Okay, so this is a video of Yamuna post-lockdown, and I want you to observe how clean the floodplain is and how much water is there in the river. Because, one of the reasons was that there was low abstraction, but at the same time, there were, weekly rainfalls happening during this time as well. So the water quality is pretty good, plus the floodplain is also very clean. And a basin near Meerut, and other videos which showed how clean the water was during lockdown period and how the aquatic life and biodiversity were reclaiming nature. So these are videos, and if some of you have been lucky enough to see it with your own eyes, so these provide us a new baseline. These give us a dream to chase. We have seen this with our own eyes now, and now we have an aspiration to fulfill. This is a dream for us to achieve. The point is, are we willing to chase this dream now? So now I'm going to talk about some of the initiatives that we're conducting through the organization and how you can be a part of these initiatives. Firstly, we want you to take up some environment-friendly practices and practice them over a month and share a selfie if you're able to do that for a month. We want you to reuse, reduce, recycle, and repurpose. This is not something very new I'm talking about. Essentially, I'm talking about resourcefulness that has been a part of our Indian tradition. We may call it a bit of conjugacy, if you will, but in a way that is being resourceful, being wise of the resources and making the maximum use of any resource that you're using. So we request you to follow environment friendly practices over a month and then share a selfie with us under the hashtag for our dreams. And the best selfies will be shared in the next webinar. So if you are a non-vegetarian, try and go vegetarian or vegan for a day a week. Try and carry cloth bags because plastic can take up to 1,000 years to degrade. Save water and harvest it as much as you can. Avoid buying jeans because a pair of jeans uses as much water as is used by a family of 4 for 12 days. Save electricity. Try and use as much of non-motorized transport and walking and cycling as much as you can. These kind of electric scooters are also available now. But remember, your electric vehicles are only as green as the source of energy. Carry your own bottle and avoid using plastic bottles. Waste at the level of your household so that it does not end up in dumps like these, and rag pickers don't have to go through such filthy conditions to pick up recyclables. And try and give excess edible food to animals so that they do not have to scavenge on this. We've had traditional practices where Indian households keep food separately for animals and birds. So that's it. We also have a Earth Day Young Climate Challenge. If you have an idea which you think can reduce climate impacts or help communities become more resilient, share it with us. I'll share the details with you in an email that follows the webinar. And now the most important one, Young Climate Leaders Network. So if you want to be a change maker and you think you can influence others to do so, then do join us. I'll share the links with you. So what you have to do is, for those who want to register and those who already have registered, try and identify a cause, issue that you think is impacting your community or your area, and find 10 more people around you who agree with you and who are ready to work towards this cause, and together we will have a discussion on how we can take this cause forward and build solutions to tackle this problem. Okay, so in the next webinar, we'll look at IWRM from a practical perspective. How will you plan in a catchment? We'll take up a hypothetical case study and undertake some planning exercise to determine how planning should be done in a catchment. We'll look at IWRM in the Indian context, and we'll also look at the urban component of water resource management. We'll also have another guest speaker next time. So thank you, and I hope you found this presentation interesting. And these are the email IDs on which you can contact us. And now we'll have the presentation by Anna.
Okay, I hope you found the presentation informative. And now we have our second speaker, Miss Anna. So Anna, I would now request you to introduce yourself and please start your presentation. I hope you have the controls now. Yeah. Oh, my camera.
Yes, Meesha, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Meesha, just checking if my mic is working. I guess it is. If not, let me know and in the chat. Yeah, just checking if my mic is working.
Yeah, it's working.
Good. Yeah. Good. Right. Great. So thank you, Meesha, for the opportunity to make a presentation for the Sustainability and Adaptation Planning Foundation that you have founded. I will speak today about the power of collaboration and stakeholder engagement in integrated water resources management. I use integrated water resources management here more or less interchangeably with river basin management, whereas there are differences. But since you have explained the catchment approach very well, I think we can look at the hydrological units now as a river basin or sub-basin. So when I talk about river basin management, I mean integrated water resource management at the catchment level. Good. So my name is Annalieke Laninga. You can call me Anna as well. That's easier. I'm a water governance consultant and facilitator of multi-stakeholder processes. And my background is in administrative law, public policy, and public management. I worked in the water sector basically for the last 20 years and nearly 10 years in India. I managed European funded projects related to cross-border river basin management prior to coming to India, and we provided inputs into the development of this common implementation strategy for the EU Water Framework Directive, and also for discussions in the UN Economic Commission for Europe. And as well as about cross-border cooperation, where conflicts happen across different administrative borders in river basin management. Now, in India, I initially helped to set up and strategize one of CII's Centers of Excellence, the CAI Triveni Water Institute, and then continues to work for about 6 years as a consultant for the 2030 Water Resources Group, which is a global public-private civil society partnership working on water security in different countries in the world, and it's hosted by the World Bank Group. And currently I'm self-employed and I'm looking for new challenges also and assignments related to water governance and stakeholder management. So just to come back to Meesha's slide, one of her slides, I found it interesting when she showed how catchments have dried up. The same area, as part of my job at the 2030 Water Resources Group, I worked not only at the national level and in other states of India, but also specifically in this area. It's called the Hindon River Basin. And the Hindon River is a second level tributary of the Ganga River. It lies between the Yamuna and the Ganga, and it reaches from the Shivalik hills on the foothills of the Himalayas to the confluence point in Greater Noida in Delhi NCR, and where the Yamuna was shown. I think that was quite close also to where the Hindon River comes into the Yamuna. And it runs through 7 districts, also through the district Meerut. Though the dolphin did not swim in the Hindon River, it swam in the Ganga on the border of the Meerut district. But thanks for showing this map, Meesha. It gives a nice transition to what I would like to explain today. Just a little bit more about the Hindon itself before I go into the stakeholder engagement. The Hindon River has 2 tributaries that you can see in these blue lines here, the Krishna and the West Kali. It also has man-made canal systems which divert water from the Yamuna and the Ganga River into the region for drinking water supply and irrigation purposes. Without the water from the Yamuna and Ganga, this Hindon catchment area, the water balance would definitely be negative. And we see that also that over the years, the water has dried up, as you explained in your presentation as well. It's no longer a perennial river. It's rain-fed at the moment. And there may be 1 or 2 small springs still, but not supplying a lot of water to make it perennial. So actually, the biggest issue in the Hindon catchment is not the availability of the water, but related to that, especially the quality, the pollution levels. And during the COVID-19 lockdown, indeed, as with all the water bodies in India, the Hindon River has also shown significant improvements in the water quality. So in this webinar, I will give examples from Hindon, my experience in the Hindon Basin, but I will actually focus more in general about stakeholder engagement processes in integrated water resource management or river basin management. A few more facts and figures here about Hindon, which you can probably look up later. So the 4 points that I will address is the rationale for collaboration, then how to design effective multi-stakeholder partnerships with different stages and key issues and tools and tactics per stage. And then I will say a few words about institutionalizing stakeholder engagement in integrated water resources management, and close with some suggested action points for follow-up linked to the foundation, which Meesha also touched upon already. What can we do ourselves? So starting with the rationale, as also explained technically very well and much better by Meesha than by me, the water systems approach means that water systems are interdependent with other ecosystems, many layers, and also this hydrological process is heavily intervened by human water abstraction. And the discharge of treated and untreated water flows back into that water system and affects the ecosystem. So if we go back to this current situation that is quite unique in COVID-19, if that has told us one lesson, then it is clear that a human factor on climate change and environmental sustainability can no longer be denied, ignored, and neglected. And the approach should not only be interdisciplinary and intersectoral, but also participatory. So again, just referring to a couple of the slides Meesha showed, the principle that integrated water resource management should be participatory is what I will focus on in this presentation, rather than on the technical hydrological details of water management. But before I go into that, I would like to highlight again the last principle on this slide, namely water has an economic value, and users are competing for water as an economic good. Since water is finite in any given system, this often leads to conflicts, and you can actually call this and refer to the concept of the tragedy of the commons. Not sure if you are fully aware of this concept. I'll just briefly state because this is the rationale why we need to collaborate, basically. The tragedy of the commons is a problem that occurs when individuals are exploiting a shared resource, such as clean water bodies, to the extent that the demand overwhelms the supply and that the resource becomes unavailable to some or to all other users. It's an economic problem in which every individual tries to reap the greatest benefits from a given resource. And it's important to understand that generally this water resource is easily available. And as the demand for this water resource overwhelms that supply, every individual or water users who consumes an extra unit of water harms directly others who can no longer benefit or enjoy the benefits of that same water unit. In river basin management, the tragedy of the commons occurs when water users neglect the well-being of the riverine ecosystem while they're trying to maximize their own gain, and to overcome these problems that emerge from this suboptimal manner of water sharing. Collaboration between water users and stakeholders is being promoted. But this is easier said than done, especially if stakeholders have competing interests. So how do we get them to collaborate? And in this webinar, I give a couple of suggestions on how to approach this. First of all, just referring to the principles of integrated water resources management. When we're trying to get stakeholders involved in collective management of their water resource, the first principle that has to be followed is the principle of subsidiarity, which Meesha explained. So meaning that water resources should be managed at the lowest possible administrative level. And unfortunately, the hydrological boundaries often do not follow the administrative boundaries. So an institutional response has been to establish river basin organizations as competent authorities for these water bodies. In India, also, several of these types of organizations exist, mostly with a specific mandate, such as, for example, dam management or water allocation to different actors and sectors. But so far, there has been very little focus by these RBO, river basin organizations, on integrated water resources management. However, the awareness is increasing that a more integrated approach is required. For example, what we see is that the EU in India, the EU-India Water Partnership is promoting this more systematic planning and implementation cycle, which is proven to be successful in Europe. Based on the Water Framework Directive, and also in other parts of the world, actually. Now, several of you are the next generation urban planners or water managers. So the importance of managing water and collaborating at this hydrological unit of a river basin is what I hope that will be the main notion, which we'll take away from this webinar. And I hope I also give you some suggestions and tools on how to do it. Now, the point is that if we go down to this lowest level, possible level of governance, we also see that there is an increasing level of details and complexity. Now, if we think of systems, water as a system, the system approach means that these are complex problems, and complex problems require a different approach than managing obvious and simple problems, naturally. So therefore, I would like to show a framework which is called the CATCHMENT framework, developed by Dave Snowden. CATCHMENT is actually a Welsh word, and it means habitats. And it explains that there are different types of problems to address. You have obvious problems, you have more complicated problems, you have the complex problems, and chaotic situations to deal with. And each of these type of problems need a different approach. So a linear cause and effect relation works for obvious problems, but it does not always exist in these complex matters that we are addressing here. At best, it becomes clear in hindsight. So it's important to realize that when you are planning your activities, that best practices or even good practices may not always work. If it works in one situation, it may not always naturally work in another. It cannot easily be repeated or scaled up or replicated. So a more probing trial and error approach in which partners or stakeholders work together and agree to experiment with within maybe a given framework that they agree on, and some inbuilt reflection mechanisms to see what the successes are, is a more likely successful approach. But experimenting with emergent practices, it doesn't only require innovative thinking, but it also is very crucial to develop a trust base between the partners and a willingness also to fail and to learn from these failures while you're working towards a joint vision or goal that you have agreed on. So later on, I will elaborate on how adaptive planning processes can be designed and facilitated. But first, I would like to come back briefly to that Hindon River Basin. And as with many basins, it's just an example where we can see the complexity of the multiple issues to be addressed. It's a puzzle with many pieces, and you can see that there are problems with industrial effluent in the basin, domestic sewage, which is flowing untreated into the water system, chemicals from agricultural fields as a runoff in the water system, groundwater which is overdrafted for irrigation and other purposes, deforestation, which Meesha also touched upon. The green cover in the basin is said to be reduced to around 3%, whereas the norm would be 30% to have a healthy ecosystem. Now, solid waste disposal is a large problem. A lot of the solid waste and plastics still end up into water bodies. Now, the point is that there is basically not one single problem. Multiple problems are there. And also, there's not one main culprit to be addressed. So there are multiple water users that are also polluters. And one solution that fits all is not possible. That is the rationale why an integrated river basin management approach and collective action is required at the hydrological scale of this basin. And this is true for most of the rivers and sub-basins in India. More or less pollution, more or less water quantity or quality, depending on the local situation. So there are variations in the problems, but it is always a multitude of issues to be addressed. Now, if we want to strengthen this participatory and transparent governance and management, I have a question for you, which I think we have a poll. Meesha, if we can put the poll up, then maybe it would be good to see what people think. Otherwise, you can also type it in the chat box. What do you think, which type of stakeholders should be involved? Just take any watershed or river basin in mind, and the poll is open. So let me see how, Meesha, if we can share this poll on the screen. I'm not so familiar with the poll, how it works technically.
They're still voting, so let's wait for
Yeah.
a few seconds and let them know.
Great. So yeah, please just highlight which stakeholders you think should be involved. And we have put some groups there, farmers, householders. There may be others, so in the chat box you can add options that we have not given in the poll.
Okay, so anybody else who wants to vote, because we're going to close the poll in around 5-10 seconds.
Yeah, please go ahead. I don't think I can see the poll right now on my screen. So if Meesha, once you close the poll, if you can just say what people have voted mostly, if there's any percentages of any of the groups, the results.
Do you want the other poll as well?
Let's do that at the end. I guess this one is relevant.
I'm going to use it now.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah, okay, some people are still voting. Okay, so we've got, I'm closing it now. So it's 27% farmers. Highest is for environmental and social NGOs and researchers. That's 32%. 27% is for farmers, 18% households, and 16% politicians and government officials.
Nice, nice. Basically, we can say that all of the options are, relevant. So in addressing these problems in integrated water resources management, more perspectives are better. Only the management of more stakeholders will become more difficult, of course. But it is important to have all the voices heard in your stakeholder groups. So thanks for that. Yeah, so we'll go back to the presentation. And I think that's, I need to, yeah. Which stakeholders to involve? We just had the poll. And how to involve a multitude of stakeholders, that is a challenge. So let me go to the next point, how to design effective multi-stakeholder partnerships for integrated water resources management. And I would like to note here that effective partnerships do not just simply happen by themselves, especially not in such complex matters as river basin management. They do need to be designed as an evolving and an adaptive process. And also it is crucial to have a facilitator as neutral as possible, facilitator, convener, moderators, or catalysts to bring and hold this partnership together, hold the sphere, and involve all the voices and make sure everybody is heard. So in this design model, there's a process model for stakeholder engagement that I would like to go through in different phases. Several phases can be identified: the initiation phase, adaptive planning, collaborative action, and reflective monitoring. Now, this model is being taught by the Center for Development Innovation of the Wageningen University and Research in the Netherlands in a 3-week intensive course, which I recommend anyone who is interested in facilitating these engagement processes to do. But the 3 weeks are here condensed into 30 minutes or less. So I will just highlight a couple of aspects, and there is an MSP guide which is very informative, and you can find the download link here on my slide. So I'll spend a bit more time on the initiation phase because that's where we will all start, and it may also be relevant to the next activities under the foundation that Meesha introduced under the Young Climate Leaders Network. So let's look at initiation. The first question, of course, is who do you invite and who do you want to leave out at this stage? So for stakeholder identification, there are several tools that you can think of, and I will recommend to start with an inventory. It's a simple list. Do a quick brainstorm, all the stakeholders that you know, what are their characteristics, their interests, their resources, and the challenges that they're facing, the water challenges that they're facing. Now, you could send out a survey to the stakeholders, or you could do it yourself with maybe a key group of stakeholders as a brainstorm, or with some experts. And you should also make a contact database, of course, so that you can be in touch with them once you've identified your stakeholders. Based on that list, you can start analyzing and deciding on your engagement strategy. So you could, for example, do a fast arrangement mapping exercise and clustering the stakeholders in groups to see if you have an equal balance of voices from different perspectives. Now, it depends on the topic of your focus, but the clusters could, for example, be just governments, industry, civil society, research, etc. Or the bottom of the pyramid segments, and you could divide between youth or women, elderly, or other groups, or a completely different clustering as per your choice. Then you should actually place the most influential decision-making actors in the center, so that the least influential actors are more on the outer ring. And the inner circle are the key stakeholders with whom you want to engage first. If they're not yet interested, you may want to monitor them and keep them informed. Following this, on the influence and the power of the stakeholders, you could make a matrix, setting them also up against the interest or priority that each of these stakeholders themselves give to your topic. And here it's interesting that there are different groups to be identified. The so-called victims in box A have high priority but low influence. So they are mostly directly affected by these water problems, but they have no power to change the situation. Whereas if you look at box C, you'll see what we can call the irresponsible actors, which actually have high influence. It's in their power to make changes, but they have currently a low priority for your issue. So the ones that can make a difference are in box B, that have a high priority for your issue already and also high influence. And what you would like to do is you would like to build capacity of the victims so that they become the ones that can make a difference. And you would like to convince the responsible to say, you know, make them aware that this topic is high on their agenda, so that you can actually work together and make the real difference. The bystanders are the ones with low priority and low influence, which you may not interact with much, and maybe just keep them involved if required. So finally, when you start working together, it's also important to realize that not all the stakeholders will have an active role in your partnership. Some of them will be partners, some of them will be rather contractors, funders, donors, knowledge providers, or others, or beneficiaries of the activities that you are undertaking. There may also be potential inhibitors, and it's important to keep an eye on who they are and anticipate what you can do to interact with them. So these were a couple of tools. So if we are saying that, you know, you need to give a lot of attention to building this partnership, if you do not give it due attention in the beginning, then you may face misunderstandings or disappointments about expectations of your partners later on. So it should be clear right from the start what the common concern is that you're addressing. And stakeholders have different backgrounds and perspectives and may not speak the same language. So work on that common language so everybody understands what we're talking about. And a tool for that could be a so-called rich picture, which is a way to also bring out differences in a light and fun manner. It's a good team building exercise. And here are a couple of examples of such rich pictures. A picture says more than 1,000 words. It helps to understand the complexity of the situation. And it's a way to think more holistically, to open innovative thinking, to see relationships and connections that they may otherwise miss. And it can be a non-threatening and humorous way to illustrate different perspectives and conflicts as well. It is a group exercise, and you should have ideally stakeholders from different groups around one table, 6 or 7 maximum to make it effective. Limited words should be used, more cartoons or pictograms, figures, and you can use Google Images, can be very handy when you work on this. There is, of course, a limitation here. Just to highlight, the top 2 pictures were done during an event organized by the Netherlands government last year. And that was done by an artist that was hired during a workshop. So basically, you could also now during COVID, it's hard to get together physically. So it's very difficult to set people around the table. And instead of that, maybe what you could do is organize a webinar, do a brainstorm online and hire one of the artists or ask one of your participants that can draw a little bit to make such a rich picture and bring out all the elements of the discussions in a visual manner. It is also a fun way of doing it. And you see on the bottom students of the university who have done field work and created these rich pictures. Then coming to a more formal part, other issues that we need to address in the initiation phase are mandate and scope of the partnership, which could be laid down in a partnership agreement signed by all the partners, or if, for example, the government is chairing or initiating this partnership, a government order could be issued to address the mandate and scope of the partnership so that everybody has clarity. And expectations of partners about their time investments, their resources that are expected from them, or meetings and the level of engagement of their seniority of their people that they need to be represented, and so forth, could be laid down as ground rules at the beginning of your partnership. Now, finally, I just wanted to say that getting to know each other better, you should definitely take sufficient time with icebreakers, for example, during meetings to instead of an introduction round of yourself, you could actually talk for a minute with your neighbor and then basically in the round introduce your neighbor instead of yourself, so that you would get icebreakers in getting to know each other. Field visits are a very good way because people informally walk through fields or sit in a bus together. Once we can again go out in groups or have lunch together. So that is building trust and very crucial for further success of your partnership. Let me go back to the Hinden example. One of the first activities there also was to make a stakeholder inventory and then start mobilizing the stakeholders through the documentation of good practices. And what was done was that a case study book was published to demonstrate what is already going well and what stakeholders are currently doing. And you can download that from the link on this slide. A traveling exhibition was organized with these case examples and opened in, it was held in Lucknow with the Chief Minister opening the exhibition. And then it traveled through the basin, through all the districts, in combination with technical workshops to deepen the understanding of the local situation and identify potential solution options. And as a result of that, initial action plans bottom up came up with people that were initially wanting to take first steps. And here also the aim was to get to know each other, build trust, and also to change attitudes from a more kind of, blaming and pointing fingers at each other for being the culprits of the problems, and rather saying, changing the mindset and saying everyone is part of the puzzle. So what is it that I can do to take self-responsibility and get out of this tragedy of the common situation? Now, towards the end, I'll just go back towards the end of this phase, it was felt that a more systematic and formalized process should actually be the next step. And recommendations were made to the government to set up river basin councils or groups anchored in with government leadership. And after some time, the state government of Uttar Pradesh adopted the idea of establishing a multi-stakeholder platform for Ganga tributary management. And the initial focus was on the Hindon Basin, and a formal government order was issued, and the first steering board meeting was held, chaired by the Chief Secretary of the UP government, and it was facilitated by the Water Resources Group. And I will go later into the vision document. So a vision document was published as well, and working groups and task forces were established to jointly address the key water management issues. Funding sources were identified in the vision documents. And so all these activities are already beyond the initiation stage. They're actually part of the adaptive planning phase. Now, what is adaptive planning? What do we mean with adaptive planning? Water systems, as we saw, and their relations with the ecosystems are not only complex and interdependent, but they're also highly dynamic and often unpredictable. So uncertainties have to be taken into account. It's the basic reality of the on-the-ground reality, but it does not mean that we cannot plan anything. So adaptive planning means that we develop the plans and we do that based on the current situation, what we know, but we have to adjust them as the situation changes. So let's just briefly touch upon a couple of the key issues in the adaptive planning phase. I'll start with the shared vision and the shared ambitions. In a vision document, the goals that are jointly agreed can be laid down. And I'll just show the example again of the Hindon. Sometimes it is good to bring the discussion on the vision statement on a higher abstraction level if there are a lot of differences in the groups. So the more abstract it is, that nobody will disagree with, for example, that we need sufficient water and sufficiently clean water in the river system, which is beneficial for all the water users. So a balanced and a healthy water system and the ecosystem depending on it to support life for flora, fauna, and people in the region through integrated and participatory river basin management was agreed to be the high-level overall vision statement for the Hindon vision documents. And to specify further what this overall vision means, key water management issues were identified in a workshop with government officials and others. And later, for all of these 4 key water management issues, the individual ambition was formulated by a group of experts with inputs of the experts. So, for example, the ambition for pollution from domestic sources was set at a high level, saying that discharge of untreated domestic water should be 0 in the basin, and that treated domestic water should be 100% reused. This is a very high level ambition, but it sets the direction where partners would like to work on together. And because of time, I will just move on quickly and will not highlight all the aspects. But what I wanted to say here is that a vision development process, the challenge there is basically that everybody's contribution should be taken into account to feel that this is a joint mission that we're on. And this is a schematic picture of how the 2030 Water Resources Group actually developed that Hindon vision document, or the Ganga tributary management document. Following your high-level vision, scenarios can be thought of, and different tools which we don't have the time right now. I can, if there's questions, highlight the so-called DPSIR framework, looking at drivers, pressures on water system, state of the basin, impact and response strategies, which can lead to different scenarios of responses that can be thought of. And I think there's a lot of people in this group that are more technically sound to come up with measures, a program of measures that can be taken in these basins once you have the data and have analyzed the problems better. Cost-benefit analysis or hotspot maps, which could be also a good monitoring tool to see, visualize where are the hotspots and how are they improving over time. And apart from scenarios, strategies can be designed in a theory of change. Theory of change is basically a results chain of inputs to outcomes and impacts. But the theory of change explains the assumptions lying behind your results chain. Why do you think that if you do certain things, it will lead to a certain output? And why would then the assumption be that that output would lead to the impact through the outcomes? So that's the theory of change as a tool. There's a lot of information online that you can look up about this tool. Then if the theory of change is clear, then the question is who will do what? The tasks and responsibilities need to be agreed between the partners or the stakeholders. And maybe we need to do a resource assessment. Is everybody able and capable of doing what they want to do? Is capacity building required? Are financial resources identified? Where these will come from? And maybe you have to put a fundraising strategy in place. And for that fundraising strategy, there are different sources of funds that we could think of, and maybe blended financing mechanisms could be designed as well. And ideally, we could try to dovetail the government's schemes with other sources of financing and leverage other funds by using both the government's funds that are underutilized as well as additional grants, loans, or from multilateral agencies, financial institutions, or even corporate foundations with CSR or other funds may be available. Without going into too much of that detail, just to highlight that fundraising should be done from an early stage in the process. So moving to the next phase of the process model, the collaborative action phase of the project is a very different level of, needs a different level of organization and management. So the focus on the executing the strategies and plans into action requires a different skill set. Maybe a change of leadership may be required, a change of team roles may be required with a focus on more technical skills at this stage of the process. It's very important to stay flexible in your process. It is a danger to have too firm, formalized structures only, and we need to see an iterative process between strategy and action. So a detailed action plan can be agreed, which can be also revised over a certain period of time. Mobilizing resources, the commitment has to come from either stakeholder groups to spend their time, their equipment, their money, their expertise, or from a third party to commit their support to this partnership to be able to move forward. Team building, again, is very important here. We can also talk about leadership, which is required to be, as I said, flexible. Maybe you need to rotate your leadership. Maybe it is useful to have different chairs at different stages of your process. Collaborative leadership can be thought of in the dynamic environment in which these multi-stakeholder platforms operate. So for team building, there are self-assessment tests, for example, the Belbin team role test, to make sure that you see that certain people have certain capabilities and are naturally taking certain roles. Whereas in a good team, you'll have different roles divided over the team members. So these are all tools that I'm suggesting, which we can look into further if there's questions, or you can look up resources on the internet about this. And so in the collaborative action phase, planning is one thing and executing is another. We have to maintain motivation and commitment of the partners. The facilitators, the host organizations, the leaders and the chairs could work on this by celebrating intermediate goals, by basically saying, you know, see, we are making progress, make it visible, and keep the morale up of your partnership. Keep everyone informed as well. Some need to be more actively informed, and you can have a communication plan or way through different channels to communicate your results. So the last phase of the stakeholder engagement process model is called reflective monitoring. This is interesting. It's not actually a phase, because throughout the entire engagement process, you would need to have reflection moments. The whole idea is that multi-stakeholder processes need to foster participatory learning. Otherwise, they're really missing the point. And during this collaboration process, the stakeholders can learn from each other's experience, and also from their own challenges, of course, to solve the problems and innovate. So I want to stress once again that a safe climate and with sufficient trust between your partners or stakeholders is crucial to work on these learning loops and trial and error. That's a precondition for learning. And again, the facilitators have an important role to play. These learning processes should actually be regular parts of your meetings. You can have regular reflection moments in the different meetings that you have, or different stages of your process. Apart from that, a performance measurement tool may be useful, which is more formal, a monitoring and evaluation framework. And I'm quite sure that several of you are aware of developing these frameworks with indicators that are smart, well formulated, and measurable, quantitative very often. So that is a performance measurement tool, which can be very helpful to communicate your result on a quantitative basis as well. And on the reflection methods, there's another resource that I would like to highlight, again, of the same university. It's called A Practical Guide for Trainers and Facilitators. So if you're interested in all these creative ways of building in reflection methods and moments into your process, then you can see a download of this resource for tools to make learning more meaningful. And this tool is, again, developed by the Wageningen University. Now, before I conclude my presentation, I would just like to briefly, if we have time, Meesha, you need to tell me if we're out of time, but this is a point that is close to my heart. I would like to basically pledge to institutionalize stakeholder engagement in integrated water resources management or river basin management in India. I feel that without a link to any formal institutions, such multi-stakeholder processes will have less impact. And also they may lack continuity. But the question is how to do it. And there may be many different ways. What is effective in one river basin may not be working in other river basins due to their formal setups. So I would just like to show one example of how multi-stakeholder platforms for collective action could be institutionalized. And that is related to the Ganga Basin, because I've been actively involved in one of the tributaries. So if we see there is this government, or the River Ganga Authorities order, in which a structure of the Ganga governance is laid down. On the right side, you see this in pink. Now, the multi-stakeholder platforms or river basin councils can be established at the sub-basin level, and they can be easily integrated in this governance structure. Links can be made to the district Ganga committees and the state Ganga committees, in which already limited stakeholders are allowed to be, members. So we already have a limited participation in this existing institutionalized structure. And these multi-stakeholder platforms, or we can call them also river basin councils, could involve more voices of the stakeholders at the lower level of governance that we saw earlier in this presentation. So this is food for thought, and I'm sure that there are other ways of doing it. For another time, we can discuss more on this if anyone is interested. So now I will close my presentation by raising the question, what is it that you can do? The Young Climate Leaders Network is one of the activities that Meesha is promoting. And if I understand correctly, that the Sustainability and Planning Adaptation Foundation will move ahead with specific water related or other related issues that are local. And I feel that, yeah, if lockdown has taught us one thing, then it's definitely that the impact of the human activities on the environment has to be taken into account when we build a new economy now. It's a great opportunity for more sustainable and climate-proof economy. And since most of you are young, you are the future. So it's up to you to basically shape this future. And I think Meesha has already introduced these ideas. The idea is that you could choose a topic, which is creating a problem in your area. And then you can initiate a local platform for collective action by finding like 10 more people that are interested. You could use some of the tools that I've presented in this presentation. You could make a stakeholder inventory and mapping to start with, and then start working on a vision and strategy formulation. And I think that Meesha will help you to facilitate these sessions in the months ahead. And step by step, you may be moving towards collective action and impact on the ground. So I've come to the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you all. Meesha, if you have anything to add at this stage, not sure if I cut down in too much of the question and answer time. Anyone has any questions in the chat? Meesha? Back to you.
Yeah, so Anna, okay, so firstly, I would like to request you to please type in your questions in the chat box. The other thing is that further to what Anna has just said, we request you to, I mean, after the webinar, I'll be sending out an email which will have a link for you to join the Climate Leaders platform. I mean, it's not necessarily only for youth. If you're enthusiastic about the cause, you're most welcome to join irrespective of the age. But the idea is that, you know, once you join, you have to motivate 10 more people. And, you know, once you've done that and you've identified your cause, we'll request you to send us an email. And the groups which keep on identifying these causes, we'll have live chat sessions with those groups to take this further. So that is how we'll go. And Anna, if you can have your video on again, because we have a question for you on Facebook. Just a minute.
Okay.
Okay. So I will also set this on. So firstly, thank you to all the people who are appreciating the sessions and the webinar. So Mr. Mondal wants to ask that there are a lot of projects being launched regarding water management, which is good, but the reality is that there are time implications and then the results are totally different. So how that kind of issue can be overcome, and what is the role of oh, he has written IWMI. It's not IWMI, it's IWRM, Integrated Water Resource Management. So how is that going to play a role in this? So I think you can take this up and then I'll add on to it.
It is a question with multiple aspects. So I will probably take the point on the results and time investments. And I must say that, first of all, water and rivers are there to stay, even beyond our time individually on this planet. These rivers have been there, as Meesha also explained, like so many thousands of years. They may disappear due to our interventions, but we have to see nature as a continuity and a long-term goal. So if we expect a river to be clean tomorrow, then we should have started, or not even started polluting it, or we should have started maybe 20 years back. So it is not a quick win and a quick solution. These processes are basically long-term, and yes, we are impatient. So we could start on a smaller scale, maybe look at it as your local area, identify a water body that is smaller that you can work on, and that can be done within a season before the monsoon, basically rejuvenate the ponds, or rainwater harvesting. There are measures that can be taken immediately and are within your own competence. Sometimes you need others, so these platforms can help to scale it up or to collaborate further. But yes, the long-term perspective, I know people are very impatient. The results don't come very quickly if we look at integrated water resources management. Therefore, the Water Framework Directive in Europe has a cycle of 6 years, and they've gone into their third cycle. That means that they've now gone up to 18 years of planning and implementation. Now the results are being shown. So that is my response to this question. I don't know if I picked out the right aspects, but yes, systemic planning, systematic approaches are required for a long term.
And your audio was lost for around 2-3 minutes in between. So if you could just state the last part again.
So the last part was basically about the European Framework Directive. I don't know if you heard that, but there are cycles of 6 years in the Framework Directive, and they've gone into their third cycle, meaning 18 years of planning and implementation. Now, after 18 years, we do see results. So yes, people are impatient, but river basin management, it's a long-term process. We need to basically see it as that. And a systematic planning and implementation cycle, which can be repeated over several years again and again, needs continuity and institutionalization. That's why I was pleading for, connecting the stakeholder engagement with some river basin organization or other institution that can take it up continuously.
Right. So I'll add to that. See, basically, we've taken hundreds of years to destroy the river basins, so to say. So I think we'll need at least around 15 to 20 years to, revive them. The reason is not just because, of the kind of projects and interventions that you need to take up, but I think what is most important here is changing the mindset, because that is where it all starts, and that is what takes the maximum time. If you start your consultation processes earlier on, you get the right stakeholders on board, and you ensure that it is a participatory process, then things are much easier in the longer run. The only question is that you have to keep on modulating and ensuring that these stakeholder groups also do not become rigid with time. They should keep on changing. There should be new members coming. There should be changes. There should be youth in it, so that it's also interesting for them, because we are talking about a long-term association which is going to last over years. People will come in for 2-3 consultations, and then they might say that, okay, where is the result? I want to see it on ground. Why should I come on board for the 4th consultation? Well, that is not the right approach, and that is what you need to make them understand. Because if it's just about implementing 1 or 2 projects, they are easy to implement, but frankly speaking, implementing a few projects is not going to change your river basin until your mentality changes, until your stakeholders are involved. So I think that is where we need to start, and that is the most important process right now. And I think youth is the real change maker here. They can lead this initiative because they know about sustainable development, they know about climate change, and they know how important water is for our survival. So that's why I request the youth to take this initiative, join the Young Leaders platform, find an issue in your area, and find more people who would be willing to be associated with this cause. And me and Anna will be too glad to help you take it forward through our platforms. Anything you want to add to that, Anna?
No, thank you, Meesha. You're talking from my heart. Thanks.
Okay, so we're getting comments on Facebook. Nice session, very informative session. So I think we've already run over time. So should we close then? Anybody has any quick questions on GoToWebinar? If you can type them out, I can read them out. If you type them out on the chat boxes or the question boxes. We'll wait for 2 minutes for any quick questions that are coming in. Otherwise, we'll close this.
Sure, Meesha. And also my email ID is there on my last slide. So if people would like to send me an email, most welcome.
Right. So I think maybe we can close now. It's already been an hour 45 minutes. So yeah. So thank you very much for everyone who's attended, and we hope you find this presentation and these sessions informative. We're going to share the recording of the webinar with you. We're going to share a feedback form with you, and we're also going to share the links for joining the Young Climate Leaders platform and the Earth Hour Champs platform. So you're most welcome to join in, and thank you on behalf of Sustainability and Adaptation Planning Foundation and CREST. And Anna, would you like to close?
Once again, Meesha, thank you for the opportunity, and I wish all of you, especially the youth, a lot of success in their future. I know that these times are adverse times. I hope that you do not let anxiety rule you, but basically see this as an opportunity to change these mindsets, starting with yourself and others in your direct environments, and build a new economy in which we can also, see the sustainability of the ecosystem around us, have a better quality of life for ourselves and others and the next generations. And you are the future. So all the best, and thanks once again, Meesha.
Thank you, Anna, to a green future. Let's hope so. Okay, thank you everyone for participating. Bye-bye.
Bye.